Okay, this is part 5. We're going over community ecology. And in this one right here, first thing I want to talk about are the 5 interactions in a community. And if you remember before, I told you this little way to remember it, which I like to do, it's easy for me, is I like to say PC, PC, PCM. And when I say that to myself, I know it stands for predation, competition, parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism. These are the 5 ways that species interact in a community, okay? And the first one, predation, simply put, predation is just animals eating other animals. So if we look at this picture right here, this is a picture of a spider that just caught a butterfly. So a lot of times people think of a predator as, something large and grandiose like a lion or a tiger or anything like that, but really a predator could be anything. Doesn't matter about the size. Is all it matters is it eating another animal of another species. So in this scenario, we're talking about a spider, and a spider eating a butterfly. That'd be a great example of predation. When we look at competition, competition would be members of another species competing for resources. Okay, some of those resources could be, food, could be water, could be space. Could be a thing like that. And if we're even talking about members of the same species, well, there could be competition for a mate. So there could be competition over a lot of different factors in a community. Next, we talk about parasitism. And in parasitism, if you remember, parasitism is a long-term relationship between two species where one benefits and the other one suffers. So here I have a picture of a mosquito. And if everyone's familiar with a mosquito, when they bite us or take our blood, it's not very pleasant for us. So the mosquito is going to benefit. He's going to get nutrition, and we are going to be bothered by it. We're going to suffer from that bite. So that would be an example of parasitism. Then we move on to commensalism, and in commensalism, that is a long-term relationship between two species where one benefits and another one is not affected or harmed. Doesn't benefit, it's not harmed. So in this example, and I've used this example several times this year, I like to talk about the large shark. And as a large shark swims through the ocean, some other smaller fish might tag along. They will benefit because they'll may get protection. No other predatory fish are going to attack them, and they may even get some scraps of food as the large shark, eats other fish. However, the shark really isn't affected by this relationship at all. He doesn't benefit, not harmed. He's just kind of blah in the whole situation. But these little guys right here, they're the ones that benefit. Okay, and then finally we talk about mutualism. And again, I've used the same example several times. That's where both organisms or both species benefit in the relationship. And the reason why, moving back, the reason why I have these separated as PC, PCM, is because these 3 right here, these are long-term relationships, okay? These are things that take place over a long period of time between two species, okay? So these are the ones that we call symbiotic relationships. Okay, and the next thing I want to go into, I want to review with you is succession. And succession is basically just reestablishing life in an area after a disturbance, okay? And if you remember, there was 2 types of succession that we talked about. One was primary, and the second one was secondary. And it's pretty easy to identify the difference between both of them. So if we look at primary succession is after a huge disturbance in the area, okay? And most commonly you see primary succession after something very drastic like a volcanic eruption. What ends up happening is as that lava takes out all life, takes out everything, eventually that lava will solidify into a hard stone, hard rock, and there won't even be any soil left over. There won't be any soil for any plant life at all in the area, And if you don't have plant life, well, you don't have your bottom level of that energy pyramid, so you can't have other life as well. So an easy way to identify primary succession is, number one, there's no life whatsoever, and number two, there's no soil. There's no soil in there at all. And succession is the process of that life be reestablishing in that area. Okay. And if you remember what happens in primary succession is the first type of life that goes into the area, that's called a pioneer species. That is the first living organism to inhabit this area after the disturbance or the destruction of everything else. And usually that pioneer species would be like a moss type plant called lichen. And what happens is that lichen grows, lives out its life, and then dies off. The remnants of that lichen, as it decomposes, that will add to a small foundation of soil. After you have that small foundation of soil, now you can have slightly larger plants inhabit the area. And as those plants inhabit the area, they will end up dying off, and they'll contribute to a slightly larger soil foundation until eventually that whole entire area will reach its top amount of living species again. It'll go back to the way it was before the disturbance. Now if we look at secondary succession takes place after just a mild disturbance in the area. Okay, easy way to identify secondary: ask yourself, is there life in the area, and is there soil? If the answer is yes, then it's secondary succession. So the example I like to use for this one would be like a forest fire. Forest fire that takes out a large portion of area, yes. Is there still soil left over? Yes. Is there likely to be survivors after the wildfire? Yes. So that would be an example of secondary succession. Secondary succession takes place a lot faster because it doesn't take the area back to the Stone Age, if you will. It doesn't take it all the way back to square one. There's still life around, so it's much easier for everything else to get reestablished after that disaster. And if you check out this picture right here, this would be a good example of how primary succession works. You start off with just the exposed. You start off with just the exposed rocks. After that, you have the lichen that grows on the rocks. When that dies off, you finally get mosses, grasses, weeds, and then as you see over time, I mean, we're talking maybe 100, 150 years to get to this area right here. But as you see, eventually life will get back to the way it was before. And once it reaches its top peak, where there's little change over time, we call that climax community. Okay? So the climax community is when there's very, very little change in the area, and there's a whole bunch of life supported, and there's not much coming in the area, not much new life. And remember, the pioneer species is the first one that enters the environment, okay, or enters the area, which would be the lichens. That's the pioneer species in succession.